Welcome back. In a moment, we'll take a look at the people putting their lives at risk to deliver aid to some of the most dangerous conflict zones on Earth. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. In North Korea, a musical show held to mark the birthday of the country's former leader, Kim Il-sung, has ended with a film showing a mock video of missiles hitting the United States. The clip, which showed a US city being engulfed in flames, was broadcast on North Korean state television. The Australian government says it will consider proposals to cull sharks in waters off Western Australia following the third fatal shark attack in the state in the past 12 months. The move comes following the death of a 17-year-old girl who was attacked by a shark while surfing off the coast of Esperance in the state's south. And tourists have been flocking to Newfoundland in Canada to see the first icebergs of the season. As you can see, this year's first one is gigantic. The Canadian Coast Guard says a significant number of icebergs have arrived months earlier than usual, prompting concerns about the effects of global warming. The conflict in Syria, the mass migration crisis, famines and natural disasters have driven an increase in the amount of people getting involved in charity work, trying to help those in need. But it comes at a time when the threat against aid workers is also increasing, as Insight's Juliana Olyenka reports.
Normal people doing extraordinary things. Tens of thousands working for hundreds of charities in desperate and sometimes dangerous situations. Today it's preserving life in Colombia, tomorrow relieving suffering in northern Nigeria. Or at sea, during the height of the refugee crisis, people volunteer to help those who need it most. Humanitarianism is rewarding, but increasingly, those who have answered the call have found themselves on the front line of danger.
There was a time where aid workers were untouchable. That obviously isn't the case anymore. We are actually now seen as collateral assets.
7 humanitarian workers killed in South Sudan. The bodies of 2 UN workers found in the Democratic Republic of Congo. 6 Red Cross workers in northern Afghanistan killed while attempting to deliver critical supplies to families living in a remote region. Choosing to save the life of others can put your own life at risk.
I mean, I think we're acutely aware of the danger. I mean, there is a real and present danger, but as I say, when you walk into these situations, you don't feel that your life is in threat or your life is in danger. But it's also being sensible and knowing that at any point this could escalate, and I've been in situations where it has escalated, and knowing that when it happens, you have to remove yourself from that situation and diminish the risk that you're actually under at that particular time.
Over the last decade, the humanitarian industry has grown, alongside the surge of conflicts and crises across the globe. Recent data shows that there has also been a rise in violence and threats towards those trying to provide assistance.
What a lot of people don't realise is that not all aid workers are on the field. In this Islamic relief charity shop, local volunteers donate their free time to help thousands of nameless victims. The distinct difference between those here in Birmingham and their colleagues further afield is the increased risk of danger.
Nobody is more acutely aware of this than Nasser Hamed. He's the CEO of this organisation. Here at their headquarters, he shows me their Wall of Honour, commemorating those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice for those in need. These 2 empty plaques will soon contain the photos of the latest casualties.
The risk is very high in certain areas, and that's why we have to be careful that we do not send people who are not aware of such risks, who are just passionate and compassionate, and then they just want to deliver aid. We need to make sure that we do not send them into very risky areas. We will use more locals. We will use expertise. If they are expatriates, there have to be some security guidance in terms of where they are involved, and obviously to be alerted as well, when it's needed to pull them out.
Are some areas too risky?
Yes.
Due to the sheer number of casualties, the Syrian civil war has changed the way aid is delivered to a conflict zone. Thousands of individuals, without the support from aid agencies, travel to the region. Aid is meant to be neutral, impartial and independent. But there have been accusations that certain individuals are travelling to Syria to fight, under the guise of an aid worker.
Would you caution against any individual going to a conflict without the backing of an organisation?
They're not aware of the logistics, they are not aware of the different parties and the laws, the local laws, including Turkish laws, Syrian laws, and so on. So it is very risky. We warn them not to do it on their own, but to work alongside aid agencies to get advice, to get so on. If you've never had an experience, how can you go to a conflict zone and try to deliver aid on your own or a group of friends? It doesn't work.
Those who join official organisations and get the correct training say aid work remains a hugely rewarding choice. Despite the risks, they are helping people they've never met, sometimes in countries on the other side of the world. Juliana Olayinka, reporting for Insight.
Well, still with us is Imran Madden, who is the UK Director for the global charity Islamic Relief. Also with us now from Oxford in the United Kingdom is Richard Corbett. He's the humanitarian lead for the aid and development charity Oxfam GB. Richard Corbett, when did you observe the rules of engagement changing when in hostile, dangerous parts of the world aid workers began being targeted?
I think over the last few years we've seen that not only are aid workers being targeted, but civilian populations have become far more, the target of certain actions. So as an organisation, we're not only concerned about aid workers, we're also concerned about disrespect for international humanitarian law and the increasing number of attacks which are indiscriminate, so can hit aid workers or can hit civilian populations.
And does that mean you've had to curtail some operations because they are simply too dangerous to undertake?
Yeah, access to certain areas in conflict zones is always very difficult, and we have security teams who advise us on where we can go and where we simply can't go because we can't put our own workers at risk. So there are certain areas which we now cannot access in different situations.
Imran Madden, do you think that it was the Syrian conflict, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, where there is no value to human life, whosever human life we're talking about?
I think it's been covered by the media to such a great extent that that is the example that's often quoted. But we're conscious that it's not just Syria; it's across so many conflict zones, and we mentioned sort of South Sudan and Yemen and other countries where international humanitarian law is not being respected. There may be indiscriminate bombing, but there is also rather sinister targeting of, not just aid workers, but civilian targets like a hospital or a collection centre. So we're conscious that things seem to be getting worse. Syria is covered by the media. We know that we've had sort of unique access to places like Aleppo, and even during the recent evacuation of Aleppo, we saw extraordinary levels of social media still coming from and recording and witnessing the challenges that everybody faces. But I think we're conscious not to say it's just aid workers who are vulnerable. Aid workers, by the nature of their business, are heavily embedded, and everybody in that particular area is vulnerable, and especially civilians. I mean, they don't have the option to be withdrawn. I mean, aid workers can actually nominate to withdraw themselves. I mean, we hope it didn't get to that situation, but they have the chance to perhaps return to the UK, but the beneficiaries don't have that option.
Richard Corbett, to what extent do freelance operators, very well intended, but individuals or groups of individuals from an organisation or a faith group or something, trying to do the right thing, but they're operating outside the umbrella of an organisation like yours, have they muddied the waters here?
I don't think they've necessarily muddied the waters. I think the concern is about the level of information they're receiving and the training they receive before they put themselves potentially in the line of fire. In organisations such as Oxfam, we not only have people on the ground who assess the situation on a daily basis to think about where's accessible and where we have to take added precautions, we also put staff through training before they ever get anywhere near a conflict zone. So, they will have experience of situations where they can think about their approach and how they would react if something happened. If
but
you're
in
going
the zones, I'm thinking, Richard, where sometimes there isn't a conventional warfare. It's not them against the others. You know, two sides to this. There are multiple sides, multiple factions fighting it out. And it has been known, hasn't it, that some terrorist groups, for instance, might actually try and disguise themselves as aid workers in order to carry out what they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, Oxfam doesn't take a view on individuals who wish to kind of go out and give aid on an individual basis. I mean, what we're looking at as an organisation is how we can make sure that when we put our staff into any situation, that they have maximum levels of security. And we will be concerned about what else is going on in that environment, and if other people are being seen as potentially using the umbrella of the aid agencies to do other things, then our security people will be aware of that, and that will go into their calculations of whether it's safe for us to go into an area.
Imran Madden, have you seen a fall-off on the number of people who are willing to put their lives on the line because of this apparently random nature of the danger they face?
As aid workers, I think the nature of aid workers is that they are very dedicated people. I mean, they are rather a unique breed, if you like, I mean, across the globe, whether they're from Syria itself or from the UK, they are uniquely dedicated people. And if anything, I think their understanding of the growing complexities and the growing vulnerability of affected populations, I think that's an extra motivation for many of them. But of course, we do have to recognise that there's a greater emphasis on getting that training correct. And I mean, my experience of going to a conflict zone is before I've even checked into the hotel, I will get a security briefing that is very comprehensive and unambiguous. And I'm very clear about what I can and can't do. And I would normally get a sort of daily briefing on the changing situation. So we take it very seriously, and we have a duty of care to our staff. I think that's very important to mention. But inevitably, it is a dangerous business.
Indeed so. Imran Madden and Richard Corbett from Oxford, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We end the programme with our Insight Bite, a little something that we feel you should know. Now, for most of the Second World War, a conflict we tend to think of in black and white. But photographs taken during the war take on an entirely new feeling and meaning when they're printed in colour, which is exactly what the Imperial War Museum in London has just done. The scarcity of colour film during the war meant that most of the images from the period are black and white. This new collection of photos depict rare scenes, including servicemen being treated in hospital and the women behind Britain's war effort. The photos are now being compiled into a book titled The Second World War in Colour. And that's all for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.